Life of Tiberius Gracchus, Chapter 13. After this, Tiberius's agrarian law was passed, and 3 men were appointed to survey and distribute the public land. These were Tiberius himself, Appius Claudius, his father-in-law, and Gaius Gracchus, his brother, who was not at that time in Rome, but was serving under Scipio in the campaign against the Numantines. Tiberius succeeded in carrying through all these measures peacefully and without opposition, and in addition he secured the election of a new tribune to replace Octavius. This man did not belong to any of the distinguished families. He was merely one of Tiberius's clients, whose name was Mucius or Mucius. The propertied classes, however, who were angered by all these measures and were becoming alarmed at the growth of Tiberius's power, took every opportunity of insulting him in the Senate. When he asked for a tent, which was normally provided at the public expense for his work in dividing up the land, they refused to approve his request, although other men had often been granted this facility for much less urgent reasons. And in the same way, his daily allowance for expenses was fixed at 9 obols. The chief promoter of these affronts was Publius Nasica, who now abandoned himself completely to his hatred of Tiberius. He was one of the largest landowners of public lands and felt bitterly resentful at being obliged to give them up. These actions had the effect of enraging the people all the more, so that when a friend of Tiberius died suddenly and malignant spots appeared all over his body, the rumor spread that he had been poisoned. A huge crowd swiftly gathered to attend his funeral, and the people carried the bier on their shoulders and stood by to witness the last ceremonies. And here indeed it seemed that their worst suspicions were confirmed, for the corpse burst open and discharged such a mass of corrupt matter that the funeral pyre was completely extinguished. When it was lit again, the body still would not burn until it had been removed to another place, and it was only after a great deal of effort that the flames could be made to take hold. Thereupon Tiberius, who wished to stir up the people's anger still further, dressed himself in mourning, brought his 2 children before the assembly, and implored the people to take care of them and of their mother, thus implying that he had given up his own life for lost. Chapter 14. Soon after this, King Attalus Philometor died, and Eudemus of Pergamum brought to Rome his last will and testament, in which the Roman people were named as his heirs. Tiberius at once made a bid for popularity by introducing a law which provided that as soon as Attalus's money arrived in Rome, it should be distributed among those citizens who had received allotments of public land so as to help them stock and cultivate their farms. As for the cities which lay within the bounds of Attalus's kingdom, Tiberius declared that the Senate had no right to decide their destiny, but that he himself would submit a plan to the people on this subject. No proposal could have been better calculated to give offense to the Senate, and when Pompeius rose to speak, he asserted that he was a neighbor of Tiberius, and therefore knew that Eudemus of Pergamum had chosen a diadem and a purple robe out of his royal treasures, and presented them to him, in the expectation that he would soon become king of Rome. Quintus Metellus also reproached Tiberius by reminding him that Whenever the elder Gracchus, his father, was returning home after a supper, while he was censor, the citizens of Rome would put out their lights so that there should be no suspicion that they were indulging beyond reason in entertainments or drinking bouts. Tiberius, by contrast, was constantly lighted on his way at night by the poorest and rowdiest elements among the people. Titus Annius also joined in the debate. He enjoyed no great reputation either for uprightness of character or for moderation, but was regarded as unrivaled for his skill in cross-examination, and he now challenged Tiberius to a judicial wager. He contended that by deposing Octavius, Tiberius had committed an act of contempt against the person of his fellow tribune, which by law was sacred and inviolable. This speech was loudly applauded by many of the senators, whereupon Tiberius rushed out of the Senate house, summoned a meeting of the assembly, and ordered Annius to be brought before the people with the intention of denouncing him. However, Annius, who knew that he was no match for Tiberius either in reputation or as an orator, took refuge in the technique of which he was a master and called upon Tiberius to answer a few questions before the argument began. Tiberius agreed, and after silence had been restored, Annius formulated this question: "Let us assume that you wish to depose me and heap insults upon me, that I appeal to one of your colleagues in office, that he mounts the rostra to defend me, and that you then fly into a passion. Will you then deprive him of his office?" Tiberius, we are told, was so disconcerted by this question that although normally no man was quicker in repartee or bolder in action, yet on this occasion he could make no reply. Chapter 15. For the present, then, he dissolved the assembly. At the same time, he saw clearly that his treatment of Octavius had offended not only the aristocratic party, but even the people, since it was generally felt that the tribunate was invested with a peculiar dignity, an august, almost sacrosanct quality, which until that day had been jealously preserved, but now it had been violated and destroyed. He therefore delivered a long speech to the people, and it will not be out of place to recapitulate a few of his arguments here, so as to indicate something of Tiberius's subtlety and powers of persuasion. He declared that a tribune was sacred and inviolable because he was dedicated to the people and stood as their protector. But, he went on, if a tribune should depart from his duty, oppress the people, cripple its powers, and take away its right to vote, he has by his own actions deprived himself of his honorable office by not fulfilling the conditions upon which he accepted it. Otherwise, we should be obliged to allow a tribune the freedom even to demolish the Capitol, or burn down the naval arsenal. If a tribune commits such actions as these, he is still a tribune, even though a bad one. But if he annuls the powers of the people, he ceases to be a tribune at all. It is not a flagrant contradiction, then, that a tribune should have power to send a consul to prison, while the people are unable to remove a tribune from authority, even when he uses it against the very men who put it in his hands. For remember that consuls and tribunes are both elected by the people. Now, the office of king not only embraces within itself every kind of authority, but kings are also consecrated to the gods by having to perform the most important of religious ceremonies, Yet in spite of this, when Tarquin acted wrongfully, the Roman state expelled him, and because of the lawless action of one man, the ancestral form of government to which Rome owes her foundation was abolished forever. Again, is there anything so sacred or so venerable in all of Rome as the order of Vestal Virgins who tend and watch over the undying fire? Yet if one of these breaks her vows, she is buried alive. For when they sin against the gods, they forfeit that inviolable sanctity which they possess on account of their service to the gods. In the same way, a tribune who infringes the rights of the people has no just claim to retain the immunity which is granted to him for his services to the people, since he is destroying the very power which is the foundation of his own. And surely, if it is legal for him to be elected to his office by a majority of votes of the tribes, then it must be still more for him to be deprived of it by a unanimous vote. Again, nothing is so sacred and inviolable as an offering which has been consecrated to the gods, but the people have never been prohibited from making use of them, or from moving or changing their position as they may choose. Accordingly, on this principle, it is legal for the people to transfer the tribunate, just as it is to transfer a sacred offering, from one person to another. Moreover, it is a fact that on many occasions men have resigned from the tribunate after taking an oath of disability, or have asked of their own free will to be relieved of their responsibilities. And from this it follows that it is not an inviolable institution, nor an office of which a man cannot be deprived. He finished.